Okay. So hello everyone. I'm very glad and thankful that all the people that is attending to this overview of the models of this new study unit. So I'm gonna be covering the study unit 2 and 3. And let me see. There you go. So the study unit 2 is focused, as Rashid mentioned before, in climate change, climate adaptation. Well, climate adaptation is going to be covering, obviously, the concepts of climate adaptation in this unit and also the impact on the agriculture, the approaches and measures of the climate adaptation for agri-food systems. Also, these are going to be covering the methods using both the extensionist advisory services they use to integrate the climate adaptation information and the practice into the agriculture. Also, we're going to be covering the incorporating climate adaptation into rural community plans. That's the point that is going to take all the knowledge to the farmers and use them, obviously. Why we should focus on adaptation? Because the adaptation for the food production system is vital and crucial to be able to produce food in the future despite of the effects of this climate change. So we need to ensure the food security. So also the study unit is going to give you examples of adaptation plans in different countries that they already adopted. Also, we're going to cover information that can be used for you to prepare farmers to take action to address this challenge that are posed by the climate change in the agriculture. So in the student unit 2, we're going to have these 3 sessions. The session 1 is going to be the introduction to climate adaptation. We're going to cover all the strategies ranging from individual to local, national, and global effort. So it's important that everyone get the knowledge to be able to prepare the farmers to this reality. Also, we are going to cover the changes in the government policies that fuel some of these adaptations. Also, we are going to cover some adaptations that occur because of the technological advances. Also, the engineering and planning, how they can allow the regions to adapt as the environment change. Also, the global adaptation effort can help as the climate change causes people to migrate. This is a huge thing that is going on around the world in Asia, and also we can see that really strong now in Latin America because we weren't like used to have this huge migration in the Latin American part. Obviously, always was in North America, but now we have a lot of migration of people from different countries to different countries too. So we're going to cover some important adaptation concepts that are very specifics, and they really needed to be in your vocabulary, like as adaptation deficit, maladaptation, as adaptative capacity. So, for example, in the adaptation deficit, you could see the limitation of some of the countries, regions, or territories has to adapt the climate change. Usually, some of the poor countries has this adaptation deficit. The maladaptations also, these are actions that intended to reduce the impacts of climate change, but however, they create more risk and vulnerability. So also we have this adaptive capacity, which is the potential of a system or community to adapt to the effects of the climate change. Also, we're going to have concepts important like resources available for adaptation, the capacity development, which is the building a system capacity to adapt to climate change, and also different strategies that are the measures that we can use to adapt to the climate change. So one of the types that we're going to cover on the adaptation, you can see in this table, we can have anticipatory adaptation, reactive adaptation, autonomous adaptation, planned adaptation, private adaptation, and public adaptation. All of these are going to be covered deeply in this course. So we have also the adaptation strategies. Like we have been seeing some of these strategies done for some of the countries, which, for example, we have effects in the climate like the rise in the sea level, and we can use like seawall, drainage, home adaptations, Also, we have been seeing changes in precipitations, and then we can use some strategies like water storage, water safety regulations, desalinization in parts of the countries or where you don't have enough sweet water. So also we have been experiencing heat waves that are going to be more frequent in the future. So we can do some strategies like building insulation, cooling technologies, green roofs for ecosystem damage and disaster. We can have very several strategies that we are going to cover in the different modules. Also, we have the agri-food adaptation strategies, as we mentioned before. What we can do in this case, we can do introduce water resilient crop varieties, optimize the water use by smart irrigation. We can connect farmers with local buyers using online marketing, using technology to collect data from the crop, the weather, use sensors to monitor the livestock, for example. So one of these adaptations could be, for example, producing locally grown food. Also, in this study unit 2, we're going to cover the session 2.2 is going to cover the climate adaptation, which are the main damaging effects of climate change, like I have been talking about the reducing food security, aggravating water shortage, damage to vital infrastructure, intensifying droughts, increasing poverty. And we can see here in the pictures clearly how the weather is becoming wild and the fires are becoming wild, and that is going to affect the most vulnerable people, as you can see in the pictures, this little poor child that doesn't have enough food to eat. So also there are local adaptation strategies. For example, we're going to cover in this unit like crop varieties and management. We have crops that have been improved that you can use to be able to reduce the use of pesticides, the use of water, water resistant varieties. Also, we can use innovative breeding techniques, water and soil management, new agronomic practices that are more friendly with the environment, obviously the importance of the farmer training and the transfers of the knowledge. Some cases that we are going to cover, like study cases, the adaptation, you can see some titles here, the area where they have been developed, and also the description that they have been, these cases of study, like natural resource management. There is a special case that is in Sri Lanka with the use of agroforestry and home gardens to increase the food security of this country. For example, conservation agriculture. I saw some people that were coming from Lesotho. So we have different planting basins from different alternatives. We can see a case done in Ecuador, which the food security and sovereignty were addressed by the urban agriculture for food sovereignty. So then you can see agroecology, climate smart agriculture in my country, Chile, with this climate smart rice production and the thing that I'm working on. And then some of the adaptation concepts also that we are going to cover, as we see in these tables, are the conservation agriculture. The foundation is in these three principles that are minimum or zero tillage, direct seeding, cover cropping, soil cover, so we don't lose too much humidity. We use efficiently the water, crop rotation, that is very important for controlling weeds. So the food security and sovereignty is our final focus, in which we are going to ensure the access to sufficient and nutritious food to meet dietary needs and preference for an active and healthy life. So there we can see in this scheme how the food security have different key points like access, utilization, stability, and availability of the food that people has to have to be able to continue doing the agriculture, doing the feeding the future people, etc. So we have the agroecology as an instrument. Most of you must be familiar with the agroecology, in which is this practical for farming is focusing in agronomy, ecology, zoology, botany, and then there are agricultural practices that are focused on producing food using sustainable land management practices, and also rely on traditional ecological knowledge, innovation, and resources for food production, considering the social movements. The agroecology principles, for example, which is one of the alternatives to adapt to the climate change, consists in sharing knowledge between producers, scientists, and other people, reducing the use of the toxic and synthetic inputs, controlling pests, diseases by natural means, etc. So also we have the climate smart agriculture, which is focused on sustainability, increasing the productivity. We know that the population is growing and we need to feed all this population, but we need to do it adapting to the climate change and reducing the emissions to decrease the global warming. So some elements is balancing the food security with long-term priorities, the ecosystem and landscape management, assist the farmer to manage climate risk and implement mitigation actions, which are crucial, the role that play the extension advisory services, facilitate the demand and side and value chain actions. So in the session 2.2, how the extensionists are able to promote the climate change adaptation. So the role that they play is very important. So these extensionists, they should know the climate adaptation planning. They should do the mapping key actors for the local situation, identify the responses at different levels, and also we have tools like the digital climate informed advisory services that can be using, and we are going to go further and deeper in our course. So also we have the climate adaptation planning as example. So how we can do this, identifying all climate risks, list them, prioritize them, some actions, and ensure the stakeholders will be able to implement these actions at the different levels. The organizations integrate these actions into their planning and also evaluate and then reevaluate this plan. So here you have an scheme of the climate adaptation processes. We have to have awareness about the situation, assess them, plan some certain actions, do the implementation, and then we should do the monitoring and evaluation and continue doing this cycle. Then finally, we're going to start the study unit 3, in which is the focus on climate mitigation. We're going to cover some fundamental concepts, types, definitions, and relevant terms. We are going to see some mitigation measures and approaches in agriculture, which is the role of the extension and advisory services in climate mitigation. Why focus on mitigation? As we focused before in adaptation. The mitigation is the effort to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions and enhance the sinks of this GHG. So the agriculture high level of GHG emissions means that the adaptation alone is not enough. So there are serious efforts that are required to mitigate these emissions. And then for the extension advisory services to be able to support farmers in implementing the mitigation strategies, they must understand the mitigation concepts, the approaches, the measures, and also in the context of the real world implementation examples. So in this cover unit, we are going to cover 3 sessions. The first session is going to be the introduction to climate mitigation, and where we are going to be focused in the role of the farmers that they play in this climate mitigation, and then the key concept related to this concept of climate change mitigation, and also the different options for climate mitigation. So the role of the farmers, especially the small farmers that are the ones that feed the world, that they are vulnerable to climate change, are primary agents in finding sustainable solutions to the climate change, and also they can mitigate climate change to preserve their livelihoods and ensure the food security. Some concepts, as we saw in the adaptation that we have, the maladaptation, adaptation capacity, here in mitigation, the main concepts are going to be decarbonization, carbon sequestration, carbon capture, and storage. These terms have been very widely used now. So you're going to be able to cover this in the unit also the carbon sink, the carbon dioxide removal, emission trading, and also one of the important concepts that is going to be the carbon pricing, in which there is a tax that is paid on CO2 emissions, which is one of the ways to empower the farmers, to give them some profit in changing the different agronomic practice to produce the food. For example, farmer mitigation options. What farmers can do? Farmers can use practices that reduce these non-CO2 emissions, including methane and nitrous oxide. For example, there are practices that can crop include like manure digester, slow release fertilizers, and then cover cropping. Then you have no-till farming, irrigation management, and rotational grazing. I put my specific example here using aerobic rice, for example. You're going to get rid of the water, and then you are not going to have methane emissions. Then you have, for example, the consumer food waste. There is another mitigation option, and introduce these measures here, encouraging consumers to shift to healthier, lower emission diets, also to reduce the product losses. We can see how the supply chains, they lose too much food. And then also in the 3.2 session, we're going to cover the climate mitigation, how the different mitigation measures and approaches to climate change in a variety of contexts, also some study cases and examples of this measured mitigation. For example, from the supply side mitigation, we're going to have sustainable intensification. We are going to cover the improving nitrogen management, reducing emissions from enteric fermentation, sequestering carbon, reducing methane emissions from rice cultivation, managing manure. So we can see, for example, as I was talking before, one of the examples is reducing the CH4 emissions from the flooded rice field, in which they are accounting for 11% of the greenhouse emissions in the agricultural sector, and also the 33% of the emissions from crops. So this is the highest crop with the greenhouse emission footprint. So what we can do, as we see in the picture, replacing the system that we used to have covered with a lot of water, using these aerobic varieties, aerobic systems, and then we can get rid of the methane and then reduce and mitigate the GHGA impact. Also, we have the demand side mitigation, which is going to be reducing food loss, shifting dietary trends, subsides and trade, finance, investment, corporate supply chains, tracking emission in the agriculture. For example, like the food loss and waste, we can see what we can do, revise the food date labeling practices, support consumer education and food waste, measure food waste and food companies, and reduce food loss by improving handling and storage practices. And finally, the promoting mitigation for the extension advisory services. We know that although there are several mitigation strategies to address the climate change impacts, promoting mitigation is more challenging than the adaptation, because there are the perceived like risk. There are financial requirements that the farmers are poor, that they can assess, they can reach those. The availability of financial incentives is not like frequent. The difficulty in verifying emission reduction, how we do the monitoring, reporting, and verifying process. And also there are gaps in the knowledge and the research and development state. So the extension advisory services mitigation, how we can do implementing methods. We're going to cover these farmer field schools. There are and similar institutions that could be acting like a channel for mitigation promotion, some developing contingency planning. Well, advisors can help farmers to develop these measures for the impacts, strengthening the local resilience, helping the farmers adopting the climate smart agricultural practice, and also do the climate informed decision making. And also we can do the stakeholder coordination and coherence, in which we can develop coherence between a stakeholder and the value chain, which it could be is necessary for successful implementation. So I'm gonna leave you with my information. I'm known in the Latin American countries as the Queen of Rice. I work in rice, doing also mitigation and adaptation in this important crop. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Karla. Thank you very much.